The wedding gown felt like a shroud. Ivy stood before the altar in a dress that had belonged to her mother, ivory silk now yellowed with age and stitched in places where the fabric had worn thin. It was the only beautiful thing she owned, and she hated it. She hated the way it clung to her body. She hated the way the veil obscured her vision, turning the world into a blur of candlelight and shadows. Most of all, she hated the man standing across from her, waiting to make her his wife. Baron Aldrich was not cruel. That was what everyone told her, as if it was supposed to be a comfort. He was simply practical, ambitious, a beta who had clawed his way up from nothing and now wanted a proper wife to cement his position. The fact that Ivy's father owed him a fortune in gambling debts was merely convenient. The fact that Ivy had begged and pleaded and wept for 3 days straight meant nothing at all. She was 20 years old, and her life was already over. The priest droned on, his voice echoing through the small chapel. Ivy's father stood in the front pew, refusing to meet her eyes. Her stepmother sat beside him, a satisfied smile curling her thin lips. They had sold her like livestock, traded her for the erasure of debts she had never incurred, and they did not even have the decency to look ashamed. Aldrich reached for her hand. His fingers were cold and clammy, and Ivy had to fight the urge to recoil. Her wolf whimpered somewhere deep in her chest, pressing against her ribs as if trying to escape. Wrong, it seemed to say. Wrong, wrong, wrong. But there was no escape. There was no one coming to save her. She had learned that lesson long ago, when her mother died and her father remarried, and the world made it clear that girls like her were meant to be silent and obedient and grateful for whatever scraps they were given. If anyone has cause to object to this union, the priest intoned, speak now or forever, hold your peace. Silence. Of course there was silence. Who would object? Who would care about one worthless girl being married off to a man she did not love? The chapel doors exploded inward. Ivy spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, broad-shouldered and tall enough to fill the entire frame. For a moment, she could not make out his features. She could only see the outline of him, the power radiating from his body like heat from a flame. Then he stepped forward, and the entire chapel fell to its knees. Ivy did not understand at first. She watched the priest drop into a bow so deep his forehead nearly touched the floor. She watched her father scramble out of the pew and prostrate himself in the aisle. She watched Aldrich release her hand and back away, his face pale with terror. The stranger walked toward her, his boots echoing against the stone floor. He was dressed in black leather and silver armor, a sword hanging at his hip, a crown of iron and obsidian resting on his dark hair. His face was sharp and angular, all hard edges and cold beauty, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and fierce and fixed entirely on her. "What is the meaning of this?" Aldrich's voice cracked with fear. "Your Majesty, I had no idea you were in the territory. If I had known, I would have—" Silence. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Aldrich's mouth snapped shut. The king stopped directly in front of Ivy. She should have bowed. She should have dropped to her knees like everyone else, shown proper deference to the Alpha King, the ruler of all the packs, the most powerful wolf in the realm. But she could not move. She could not breathe. She could only stare up at him as he studied her face with an intensity that made her skin burn. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ivy." The word came out barely louder than a whisper. "Ivy Thorne." Something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. Recognition, hunger, and beneath it all a shock so profound it seemed to shake him to his core. "This wedding is over," he announced, his voice ringing through the chapel. "This woman is not marrying anyone today." Aldrich sputtered. "Your Majesty, you cannot simply—" The king turned his gaze on the Baron, and Aldrich shrank back as if struck. "I can do whatever I wish," the king said coldly. "She is my mate, and anyone who tries to take her from me will die where they stand. Ivy's mind went blank. Mate. The word echoed through her skull, foreign and impossible. She had heard stories about the mate bond, whispered tales of souls recognizing each other across crowded rooms, of wolves finding their perfect match and knowing instantly that they were meant to be together. But those were fairy tales, dreams for girls who had the luxury of hoping, not for girls like her who had learned to expect nothing but disappointment. And yet, here was the Alpha King, standing before her in all his terrifying glory, claiming her as his in front of everyone she knew. "I do not understand," she breathed. "I have never met you before." "No," he agreed. His voice was low, rough, as if the words were being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "But my wolf recognized you the moment I entered this chapel. The bond does not lie." His gray eyes searched her face, and for just a moment she saw something vulnerable beneath the cold authority. "Do you not feel it?" Ivy opened her mouth to say no, to deny whatever madness he was speaking. But the words died on her tongue, because she did feel something, a pull in her chest, like a thread tied around her heart, tugging her toward him. Her wolf, which had been whimpering and recoiling from Aldrich, was now straining forward with desperate longing. She felt it. She just did not want to. "This is absurd." Aldrich's voice broke the moment, high-pitched with indignation. "Your Majesty, I have a legal contract with this woman's father. She belongs to me. The debts have been settled, the agreement signed. You cannot simply walk in and—" "I can." The king did not even look at him. "Your contract is void. The debts will be paid from the royal treasury, and if you speak again, I will have your tongue removed." Aldrich went pale and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the altar steps. The king extended his hand toward Ivy. His fingers were long and elegant, calloused in ways that spoke of sword work and hard training. He waited, patient and still, as if he had all the time in the world. "Come with me," he said. "I will not force you, but I am asking." Ivy stared at his outstretched hand. Behind her, she could feel Aldrich's gaze burning into her back. To her left, her father remained prostrate on the floor, too cowardly to even look at her. Her stepmother had gone white as chalk, all her smug satisfaction evaporated in the face of royal authority. She had a choice. She could refuse. She could stay here and let Aldrich claim her as his wife, spend the rest of her life in a loveless marriage to a man who saw her as nothing more than property. Or she could take the hand of a stranger who claimed she was his mate. It was not much of a choice at all. Ivy placed her trembling fingers in his palm. The moment their skin touched, heat flooded through her veins. Her wolf howled with triumph, and she saw the king's gray eyes flare silver for just an instant before he regained control. His hand closed around hers, warm and steady, and he led her down the aisle toward the shattered chapel doors. No one tried to stop them. No one dared. A carriage waited outside, black lacquered wood with silver fittings and the royal crest emblazoned on the door. Guards in polished armor flanked it on either side, their faces impassive as the king helped Ivy inside. The interior was lined with velvet and silk, more luxurious than anything she had ever touched. She sank onto the cushioned seat and tried to remember how to breathe. The king climbed in after her and settled across from her, his long legs taking up most of the space between them. The carriage lurched into motion, and just like that, she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. "You are frightened," he observed. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "I can smell it on you." "I was about to be married to a man I despise," Ivy said flatly, "and now I am in a carriage with a man I do not know, who claims I am his mate based on nothing but a feeling. Forgive me if I am not entirely calm." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or amusement. "You speak plainly." "I have nothing left to lose." She lifted her chin, meeting his storm-gray eyes with a boldness she did not entirely feel. "If you are going to take me somewhere, I would at least like to know your name." The corner of his mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. "Ronan," he said. "My name is Ronan Valeris, King of the Northern Territories, Alpha of the Iron Pack." He paused, and his gaze softened in a way that made her heart stutter. "And apparently, your mate." Ivy did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all and watched the chapel disappear behind them as the carriage carried her toward a future she had never imagined. The journey to the capital took 3 days. 3 days of riding in the king's carriage, surrounded by luxury she had never experienced. 3 days of meals served on porcelain plates, of warm blankets and soft pillows and servants who bowed when she passed. It should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt like a cage made of silk and gold. Ronan gave her space. He rode alongside the carriage during the day, only joining her for meals in the evening when they stopped to make camp. He was unfailingly polite, almost formal, as if she were a visiting dignitary rather than a woman he had claimed as his mate in front of a chapel full of witnesses. He asked her questions about her life, her interests, her favorite books. He listened to her answers with careful attention. But he never touched her, never pushed, never demanded anything she was not willing to give. It confused her. She had expected a king to be commanding, imperious, accustomed to taking whatever he wanted. Instead, Ronan treated her like something fragile, something precious, and she did not know what to do with that. On the second night, Ivy could not sleep. She lay in her tent, staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the crackle of the campfire outside. Her mind would not stop racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Aldrich's clammy hands reaching for her. She saw her father's cowardly refusal to meet her gaze. She saw her stepmother's satisfied smile. They had sold her. Her own family had sold her like cattle, and they had not cared at all. A sob caught in her throat. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound, but it was too late. The tent flap rustled, and Ronan ducked inside. "Ivy." His voice was soft with concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing." She turned her face away, humiliated by her tears. "I am fine. Go back to sleep." He did not go. Instead, he crossed the tent and knelt beside her bedroll, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He did not touch her. He simply waited, patient and steady, until she finally turned to look at him. "You do not have to pretend with me," he said quietly. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you did not ask for any of this." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I did not ask to be sold to Baron Aldrich. I did not ask to be rescued by a king who claims I am his mate. I did not ask for anything that has happened to me in the past week." Her voice cracked. "I have not had a choice in anything for as long as I can remember." Ronan was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I cannot change what has been done to you," he said. "I cannot undo the pain your family has caused, but I can promise you this." His gray eyes held hers, fierce and sincere. "You will always have a choice with me, always. If you do not want this bond, I will let you go. I will give you a house, servants, money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You will owe me nothing." Ivy stared at him, searching his face for the lie. There had to be a lie. Men like him did not give up what they wanted. Men like him did not offer freedom without expecting something in return. But all she saw in his storm-gray eyes was truth. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because the bond means nothing if you do not choose it." His voice roughened with emotion. "I have seen what happens when mates are forced together against their will. My parents were such a match. My father claimed my mother because he wanted her, not because she wanted him. She spent her entire life trapped in a marriage that destroyed her. He paused, and something dark flickered in his eyes. I will not do that to you. I refuse to become him. Ivy's heart clenched. She saw the pain in his face, the old wound that had never fully healed. This was not a king speaking to his subject. This was a man haunted by his past, terrified of repeating the sins of his father. What happened to her? She asked softly. Your mother? Ronan looked away. She died when I was 12. They called it an illness, but I know the truth. She simply stopped wanting to live. His jaw tightened. I held her hand at the end. She told me to never force a woman to love me. She made me promise. Ivy reached out without thinking and took his hand. His fingers were cold, and she felt a tremor run through him at her touch. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry. Ronan looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, something soft and wondering and achingly vulnerable. Stay with me, he said quietly. Not because of the bond, not because you have no other choice. Stay because you want to. Give me a chance to prove that I am not the monster you fear. Ivy should have refused. She should have taken his offer of freedom and run as far from this complicated, broken king as she could get. Instead, she tightened her grip on his hand. I will stay, she said, for now. It was not a promise, but it was a beginning. The palace was nothing like Ivy had imagined. She had expected cold stone and dark corridors, a fortress built for war and intimidation. Instead, she found gardens bursting with flowers, sunlit halls lined with tapestries, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling to let in the warmth of the day. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. And everywhere she went, servants bowed and whispered and stared at her like she was some exotic creature on display. Ronan gave her rooms in the east wing, a suite larger than her father's entire house. She had her own sitting room, her own bathing chamber, her own private balcony overlooking the royal gardens. A team of maids attended her every need, bringing gowns and jewels and delicacies she had never tasted before. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt like a bird in a gilded cage, beautiful and trapped. But Ronan kept his promise. He did not push. He did not demand. He simply appeared at her door each evening and asked if she would like to walk with him in the gardens or share a meal in his private dining room. Sometimes she said yes, sometimes she said no, and he accepted both answers with the same quiet grace. 2 weeks into her stay, Ivy finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Why were you at that chapel? They were sitting in the garden, on a stone bench beneath a trellis of climbing roses. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and Ronan's profile was sharp against the fading light. I was traveling through the territory, he said slowly, visiting the outer villages, hearing grievances from my people. It is something I do every year. That does not answer my question. Ivy turned to face him fully. There are 100 chapels in 100 villages. Why did you walk into mine? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he let out a breath and ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. I do not know, he admitted. I felt something. A pull. My wolf was restless all morning, pacing inside my chest like it was searching for something. He looked at her, and his gray eyes were troubled. When I saw that chapel, I could not walk past it. Every instinct I had demanded that I go inside. And then I saw you standing at that altar, and I understood why. Ivy's heart stuttered. The bond. It had drawn him to her before they had ever met. Do you believe in fate? She asked quietly. I did not used to. His mouth curved into something almost like a smile. I believed in strategy, planning, control. I believed that a man made his own destiny through strength and will. He paused, and his gaze softened as it rested on her face. Then I walked into a chapel and found my mate about to marry another man, and I realized that some things are beyond our control. Ivy looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. The bond pulsed in her chest, warm and insistent, but she still did not fully trust it. She had spent too many years learning that hope was a luxury she could not afford. "Tell me about yourself," she said, changing the subject. "Not the king, not the alpha. You." Ronan seemed surprised by the question. He leaned back against the bench, his shoulder brushing hers, and stared up at the darkening sky. "I do not know what to say," he admitted. "I have been king since I was 18. Before that, I was the prince, trained from birth to rule. There has never been much room for anything else." "What do you do when you are not being king?" He thought about it. "I read. History, mostly, and philosophy. I like understanding how people think, what drives them." A faint smile crossed his face. "I also train with my guards every morning. It keeps me sharp, and it reminds them that their king is not soft." "You do not seem soft to me," Ivy said dryly. "No?" He turned his head to look at her, and there was something warm in his eyes. "I feel soft when I am with you, softer than I have felt in years." The admission hung in the air between them. Ivy felt her cheeks flush with heat, and she looked away quickly before he could see how much his words affected her. "I like to paint," she offered quietly. "Or I used to, before my stepmother decided it was a waste of time and sold my supplies. I used to spend hours in the garden behind our house, trying to capture the way the light changed through the day." "You will have supplies again," Ronan said immediately. "Whatever you need. Canvas, brushes, paints. Name it, and it is yours." Ivy shook her head. "You do not have to." "I want to." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady around hers. "I want you to have everything you were denied. I want to see you paint. I want to know every piece of you that they tried to stamp out." Ivy looked down at their joined hands. Her heart was racing, her wolf pressing against her ribs with eager longing. She was falling for him. She could feel it happening, slow and inevitable, like water wearing away at stone. And for the first time since he had walked into that chapel, she was not entirely sure she wanted to stop it. The painting supplies arrived the next morning. Not just a few brushes and a handful of paints, but an entire studio's worth of materials. Canvases in every size, pigments in colors Ivy had only ever dreamed of. Brushes made from the finest sable, their handles carved from polished oak. There were easels and palettes and jars of linseed oil, charcoal sticks and sketchbooks bound in soft leather. It was more than she could use in a lifetime, and it had appeared without warning, without fanfare, without Ronan even mentioning it to her. She found him in the training yard that afternoon, sparring with his guards in the summer heat. His shirt was gone, his chest gleaming with sweat, and Ivy had to remind herself to breathe as she watched the muscles of his back flex with each swing of his sword. He moved like water, fluid and deadly, and something primal stirred in her belly at the sight. He caught her watching and called a halt to the session. The guards retreated with knowing smiles, and Ronan crossed the yard toward her, grabbing a cloth to wipe the sweat from his face. "You saw the supplies," he said. It was not a question. "I saw them." Ivy folded her arms across her chest, trying to look stern despite the warmth spreading through her. "I told you that you did not have to do that. And I told you that I wanted to." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the salt on his skin and the cedar of his soap beneath it. "Did I overstep?" She should have said yes. She should have maintained the careful distance she had built between them, reminded him that she was here by choice, but not by commitment. Instead, she found herself shaking her head. "No," she admitted quietly. "You did not overstep. It was thoughtful. Kind." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. No one has ever done something like that for me before. Something flickered in Ronan's storm-gray eyes. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Then everyone you have ever known has been a fool, he said softly. You deserve kindness, Ivy. You deserve to be treasured. The walls she had built around her heart trembled. She felt them cracking, crumbling, threatening to collapse entirely under the weight of his sincerity. No one had ever looked at her the way Ronan was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she was worth fighting for. Ronan, she whispered. She did not know what she meant to say. His name was the only word she could manage. He cupped her face in his hands, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, feather-light, and she shivered despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Tell me to stop, he murmured. If you do not want this, tell me now, and I will walk away. I will never mention it again. Ivy knew she should tell him to stop. She knew she should protect herself, guard her heart, keep him at arm's length until she was certain she could trust him completely. But her wolf was howling in her chest, and the bond was singing in her veins, and she was so tired of being afraid. Do not stop, she breathed. Ronan kissed her. His lips were warm and firm against hers, gentle at first, almost questioning. But when Ivy's hands fisted in the fabric of his shirt and pulled him closer, the gentleness gave way to hunger. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was the only air he had ever needed. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her onto her toes, pressing her body against the solid heat of his chest. Ivy had been kissed before, clumsy, fumbling attempts by village boys who had no idea what they were doing. But nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the fire that roared through her blood, the way her wolf howled with triumph, the absolute rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for breath, Ronan pressed his forehead against hers and smiled. I have wanted to do that since the moment I saw you, he admitted, standing at that altar in your mother's gown, looking so lost and so brave at the same time. I was terrified, Ivy confessed. I know. He kissed the tip of her nose. But you are not terrified now. Are you? She considered the question. Her heart was racing, her body trembling, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened. But beneath all of that, she felt something she had not felt in years. Safe. She felt safe. No, she said softly. I am not terrified. Ronan smiled again, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost beautiful. He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Then stay with me, he said. Not for now, forever. Before Ivy could answer, a shout echoed across the training yard. A guard came running toward them, his face pale with urgency. Your Majesty, a messenger has arrived from Baron Aldrich. He claims the Lady Ivy is his legal property, and he demands her return. He has filed a formal challenge with the Council of Alphas. The warmth drained from Ivy's body. She looked at Ronan, and the cold fury in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. The fight for her freedom was just beginning. The Council of Alphas convened 3 days later. Ivy had never seen so many powerful wolves gathered in one place. They filled the great hall like a storm made flesh, alpha lords from every territory in the realm, their eyes sharp and their judgments sharper. They sat in a semicircle of carved wooden thrones, watching as Baron Aldrich presented his case with oily confidence. The contract is clear, my lords. Aldrich held up a sheaf of parchment, his thin lips curled in a smile that made Ivy's skin crawl. Lord Thorne signed his daughter over to me in exchange for the settlement of his debts. The terms were agreed upon, witnessed, and sealed. The king's intervention was illegal. The woman belongs to me. Ivy stood beside Ronan at the front of the hall, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She had dressed carefully for this moment. in a gown of deep blue silk that Ronan had chosen for her, her hair swept up in an elegant arrangement. She looked like a queen. She felt like a lamb surrounded by wolves. Ronan's hand found the small of her back, warm and steady through the fabric of her dress. The touch grounded her, reminded her that she was not alone. But even his presence could not quiet the fear that churned in her stomach. "The contract is irrelevant," Ronan said. His voice was calm, but Ivy could hear the steel beneath it. "Ivy Thorne is my true mate, recognized by the bond that cannot be forged or faked. Ancient law supersedes any human contract. She belongs with me." A murmur rippled through the council. Several of the alphas exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "True mates are rare," one of them said. He was an older wolf with silver hair and cold blue eyes, and he spoke with the weight of decades of authority. "How do we know this bond is genuine? The king would not be the first man to claim a mate bond to justify taking what he wants." Ivy's heart clenched. She looked at Ronan, saw the flash of anger in his eyes before he controlled it. "You doubt my word, Lord Ashford." "I doubt convenient claims made by powerful men." Lord Ashford leaned forward in his throne. "If the bond is real, prove it. Let the woman speak for herself." Every eye in the hall turned to Ivy. She felt the weight of their gazes pressing down on her, suffocating her. Her wolf whimpered in her chest, and for a terrible moment she could not find her voice. Then Ronan squeezed her hand and the panic receded. "I feel it," she said. Her voice was quiet at first, barely more than a whisper, but it grew stronger as she spoke. "The bond. I felt it the moment he walked into that chapel. My wolf knew him before my mind did. She reached for him like she had been searching for him her whole life." She lifted her chin and met Lord Ashford's cold gaze. "Baron Aldrich bought me like livestock. King Ronan gave me a choice. I choose him." Another murmur swept through the council. Some of the alphas nodded, their expressions softening. Others remained skeptical, their eyes narrow with suspicion. Aldrich stepped forward, his smile never wavering. "A pretty speech, my lords, but words are cheap. The girl is clearly under the king's influence, saying whatever she has been told to say." He turned to face Ivy directly, and something cruel flickered in his eyes. "Tell me, Lady Ivy, did the king mention what happens to women who reject their contracted mates? Did he tell you about the consequences your father will face if this bargain is broken?" Ivy's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Your father still owes me a considerable sum." Aldrich's voice was silky with satisfaction. "I was willing to forgive the debt in exchange for your hand. But if you refuse to honor our agreement, I will have no choice but to collect what is owed. Your father will be thrown into debtor's prison. Your stepmother will be cast out onto the streets. Everything they own will be seized." He spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. "Is your happiness truly worth destroying your family?" The hall fell silent. Ivy stood frozen, her mind reeling. Her father had sold her. Her stepmother had smiled as she walked to that altar. They did not deserve her protection. They did not deserve anything from her. But could she truly condemn them to ruin? "This is extortion." Ronan's voice was deadly quiet. "You would threaten an innocent woman to get what you want." "I am merely explaining the consequences of her choices." Aldrich's smile widened. "The council must rule on the facts, Your Majesty, and the facts are clear. I have a legal claim. You have a convenient story." He bowed mockingly. "I trust the council will make the right decision." The alphas began to deliberate, their voices low and urgent. Ivy watched them with growing dread, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had thought the hard part was over. She had thought that choosing Ronan meant she was finally free, but Aldrich was not going to let her go. And she was beginning to realize that her father's debts were a chain she might never escape. Ronan pulled her close, his arm tight around her shoulders. "I will not let him take you," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do." You are mine, Ivy, and I protect what is mine. She wanted to believe him, but the cold weight of Aldrich's threat settled in her chest like a stone, and she could not shake the terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. The council ruled in Ronan's favor. By the narrowest of margins, they declared that the mate bond took precedence over Baron Aldrich's contract. Ivy was legally free, her debt to Aldrich dissolved by ancient law. When the decision was announced, Ronan pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. For one shining moment, she allowed herself to believe it was over. She should have known better. The letter arrived 3 days later. Ivy found it slipped beneath her chamber door, a single sheet of parchment sealed with Baron Aldrich's crest. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal and read the words scrawled in his spidery handwriting. The council may have freed you, but they cannot free your conscience. Your father has been arrested for his debts and will be transported to the iron mines within the week. Your stepmother has been cast from her home and is begging on the streets. This is the price of your selfishness. But there is still time to make things right. Come to me willingly, and I will release them both. Refuse, and their suffering will be on your head. Ivy read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words carved deeper into her heart. Her father had sold her. Her stepmother had smiled while she did it. They did not deserve her sacrifice. They did not deserve anything from her. She knew this. She believed this. But they were still her family. And the thought of her father wasting away in the iron mines, of her stepmother starving in the gutter, twisted something inside her that she could not ignore. She did not tell Ronan about the letter. She should have. She knew she should have. But she could see the happiness in his eyes every time he looked at her. The relief that the council had ruled in their favor. The hope for a future they could build together. She could not bear to shatter that hope with Aldrich's poison. Instead, she made her decision alone. She waited until the palace had fallen silent, until Ronan was asleep in his chambers and the guards had changed their shifts. Then she dressed in her plainest clothes, the ones she had arrived in, and slipped out through the servants' entrance. The night was cold and moonless, and she moved through the darkness like a ghost. Every step felt like dying. She left him a letter. It was the coward's way, she knew, but she could not face him. She could not look into his storm-gray eyes and tell him she was leaving. The words would have broken her. I am sorry. I have to do this. Please do not come for me. Please forget I ever existed. You deserve someone who can give you everything without bringing ruin to everyone she loves. That person is not me. It was never me. The carriage Aldrich had sent was waiting at the edge of the city. He sat inside with that thin, satisfied smile, looking at her like a hunter who had finally snared his prey. I knew you would come, he said as she climbed inside. You are predictable, Lady Ivy. Weak. Sentimental. It is your greatest flaw. Ivy said nothing. She stared out the window as the carriage lurched into motion, watching the lights of the palace grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The journey to Aldrich's estate took 2 days. He did not touch her, did not speak to her beyond the occasional mocking comment. He simply watched her with those cold, calculating eyes, savoring his victory. Ivy felt herself growing number with each passing mile, the bond in her chest aching like a wound that would not heal. Ronan would be awake by now. He would have found her letter. He would know that she had left him. Would he come for her? He had promised to protect her, promised that he would not let Aldrich take her. But she had made her choice. She had walked away willingly, sacrificed herself for a family that had never loved her. What right did she have to expect him to fight for her now? When they arrived at Aldrich's estate, he led her to a room in the east tower. It was comfortable enough, with a soft bed and a window overlooking the grounds. But the door locked from the outside, and the window was barred, and Ivy understood exactly what she had become. A prisoner, a possession, a thing to be owned. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, and something inside her finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, silent and endless, as the full weight of what she had done crashed over her. She had left her mate. She had abandoned the only person who had ever truly seen her, truly valued her, truly loved her. And now she was trapped in the gilded cage she had feared from the beginning, with no hope of escape. Miles away, in the palace he had built for her, Ronan read her letter and felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Then he shifted into his wolf form and began to run. Ivy lost track of time in the tower. Days blurred together, each one identical to the last. Servants brought her meals she could not eat. A maid came to dress her in gowns Aldrich had chosen, delicate things in pale colors that made her feel like a doll being prepared for display. He visited her each evening, sitting across from her with that thin smile, talking about their upcoming wedding as if she had any choice in the matter. She did not speak. She did not fight. She simply existed, hollow and empty, waiting for the end to come. On the 5th night, Aldrich arrived with a different expression. His smile was sharper, his eyes gleaming with something that made her stomach turn. "Your king has been causing trouble," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "He has been tearing through the countryside like a madman, demanding your return. He even had the audacity to threaten me with war." Aldrich laughed, a cold, brittle sound, as if he would risk his entire kingdom for a worthless girl like you. Ivy's heart lurched. Ronan was looking for her. Despite her letter, despite her pleas, he was coming. "He will not find you here," Aldrich continued, reading the hope in her eyes with obvious pleasure. "I have taken precautions. By the time he realizes where you are, we will already be married, and there will be nothing he can do about it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ceremony is tomorrow night. I suggest you prepare yourself." He left her alone with those words ringing in her ears. Tomorrow night. She had one day left. One day before she became Baron Aldrich's wife, bound to him by law and ceremony, lost to Ronan forever. She could not let that happen. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Ivy felt something stir inside her. Not hope, exactly. Something fiercer. Something that felt like rage. She had spent her entire life being sold, traded, controlled by men who saw her as nothing more than property. She had let fear dictate her choices, let guilt drive her back into chains. But she was done. She was done being weak. She was done being a victim. If Ronan was fighting for her, then she would fight too. The next morning, when the maid came to dress her, Ivy was ready. She waited until the woman turned her back, then grabbed the heavy candlestick from the bedside table and brought it down hard. The maid crumpled without a sound. Ivy caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently onto the bed. She felt a pang of guilt, but there was no time for hesitation. She took the maid's keys and slipped out of the tower. The estate was a maze of corridors and locked doors, but Ivy had spent 5 days watching, listening, memorizing the patterns of the guards. She moved through the shadows like smoke, her heart pounding against her ribs, her wolf finally awake and alert inside her chest. She was almost to the outer gates when the alarm bells began to ring. Guards flooded the courtyard, their torches cutting through the darkness. Ivy pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She was trapped. There were too many of them, and she had nowhere to go. Then she heard it. A howl, long and piercing, echoing across the night sky. She knew that howl. She felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the very core of her being. Ronan. He came over the wall like a shadow made flesh, his massive wolf form tearing through the guards with savage precision. Behind him came more wolves, an entire pack of them, their eyes gleaming in the torchlight. They moved as one, a coordinated assault that left Aldrich's men scrambling in panic. Ivy ran. She sprinted across the courtyard toward the chaos, toward the wolf who was ripping through everything between them. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, and he shifted mid-stride, his human form emerging from the darkness with blood on his hands and fury in his storm-gray eyes. Ivy. Her name was a broken sound on his lips. He caught her as she threw herself into his arms, crushing her against his chest. I found you. I found you. You came for me. She was sobbing, clutching at him, unable to believe he was real. I told you not to come. I told you to forget me. I could never forget you. He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his eyes blazing with intensity. You are my mate, my heart, my soul. I would burn the entire world to ashes before I let anyone take you from me. A slow clap echoed through the courtyard. They turned to find Baron Aldrich standing at the top of the stairs, a crossbow in his hands, the bolt aimed directly at Ronan's heart. How touching, Aldrich sneered. The mighty Alpha King brought to his knees by a worthless village girl. His finger tightened on the trigger. I wonder how she will feel when she watches you die. Ivy did not think. She simply moved. She threw herself in front of Ronan at the exact moment Aldrich pulled the trigger. The bolt struck her shoulder instead of Ronan's heart, and the pain was like nothing she had ever felt before. White-hot agony tore through her body, and she heard herself scream as she crumpled to the ground. Ivy! Ronan's voice was raw with horror. He caught her before she hit the stones, cradling her against his chest. No, 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 no! What have you done? I could not let him kill you, she gasped. Blood was spreading across her gown, warm and wet, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. I already left you once. I was not going to lose you again. Aldrich stared at them with something like shock on his face. He had not expected her to move. He had not expected her to sacrifice herself. It was the last mistake he ever made. Ronan's wolves descended on him before he could reload. Ivy heard his screams, distant and muffled through the roaring in her ears, but she could not bring herself to care. All that mattered was Ronan's face above her, his storm-gray eyes bright with tears. Stay with me, he begged. Do not close your eyes. Ivy, please. I am sorry, she whispered. I should never have left. I should have trusted you. You can apologize later. He pressed his hand against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. You are going to live, do you hear me? I am not giving you permission to die. She wanted to laugh at that. Only Ronan would try to command death itself. But her body was growing heavy, and the darkness was creeping in, and she was so very tired. I love you, she managed. The words felt important. She needed him to know. I love you, Ronan. His face crumpled. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, his tears falling onto her cheeks. I love you too, he said roughly, more than my crown, more than my kingdom, more than my own life. His voice broke. Do not leave me, please. I cannot survive this world without you. The bond pulsed in her chest, warm and bright despite the cold spreading through her limbs. She felt it reaching for him, twining around his heart, holding on with everything it had. And then her wolf, dormant for so long, finally woke up. The shift took her without warning. One moment she was bleeding out in Ronan's arms, and the next she was changing, her body reshaping itself in a burst of golden light. The pain receded, washed away by the transformation, and when she opened her eyes, she was looking at the world through new ones. She was a wolf, small and silver-white, her fur gleaming in the torchlight, and the wound that should have killed her was already healing, knitting itself together with impossible speed. Ronan stared at her, his expression shifting from grief to shock to overwhelming joy. Your wolf, he breathed. Ivy, your wolf saved you. She shifted back, gasping, naked and trembling in his arms. The wound in her shoulder was nothing more than a pink scar, tender but whole. She touched it with shaking fingers, unable to believe what had just happened. I shifted, she said wonderingly. I have never been able to shift before. Some wolves need a reason. Ronan pulled her close, wrapping his cloak around her bare shoulders. Some wolves need something worth fighting for. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with emotion. You found yours. Ivy laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. She was alive, she was whole, and she was in the arms of the man she loved. Around them, the courtyard had gone quiet. Aldrich's body lay still at the base of the stairs, and his guards had either fled or surrendered. Ronan's wolves stood in a protective circle, their eyes fixed on their king and his mate. "Marry me," Ronan said suddenly. Ivy blinked at him. "What?" "Marry me." He was not asking this time. His voice was fierce, his hands tight on her shoulders. "Not because of the bond, not because some contract says you belong to me. Marry me because I love you, and I cannot imagine spending another day without you as my wife." Ivy stared at him. She thought about the girl who had stood at that altar in her mother's wedding dress, about to marry a man she despised. She thought about the woman who had run from the only person who ever truly loved her because she was too afraid to believe she deserved happiness. She was done being that woman. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Ronan's face split into a smile so bright it could have lit the entire night. He swept her into his arms and kissed her, deep and fierce and full of promise. And as his wolves howled their approval to the starlit sky, Ivy finally understood what it meant to be free. The wedding was nothing like the one Ivy had fled. There was no yellowed gown passed down through generations of sorrow, no cold chapel filled with strangers who saw her as property, no groom whose touch made her skin crawl. Instead, there were gardens overflowing with flowers. There were hundreds of guests who cheered when she walked down the aisle. There was a gown of ivory silk and silver thread, designed just for her, fitting her body like it had been made by magic. And there was Ronan, waiting at the altar with tears in his storm-gray eyes and a smile that made her heart soar. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Ronan kissed her like the world was ending and beginning all at once. That night, as they lay tangled together in their chambers, Ivy traced the lines of his face and marveled at how much had changed. 2 months ago, she had been a prisoner in her own life, sold to a man she despised, with no hope of escape. Now she was a queen, a wife, a woman who had finally learned that she deserved to be loved. "What are you thinking about?" Ronan murmured, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am thinking about how strange fate is." She smiled up at him. "If you had not walked into that chapel, I would be married to Aldrich right now. I would have spent the rest of my life miserable and trapped." "Then I am grateful I listened to my wolf." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "He has always been wiser than me." Ivy laughed softly and nestled closer to his warmth. The months that followed were the happiest of her life. She painted every day, filling canvas after canvas with scenes of the palace and the gardens and the kingdom that was now her home. She ran with Ronan under the full moon, two wolves racing through the forest together, their bond growing stronger with each passing night. She learned what it meant to be a queen, to stand beside her king, to be seen and valued and respected. And when she began to feel ill in the mornings, when her body started to change in ways she did not understand, she went to the healers with trembling hands and a heart full of hope. The news came on a crisp autumn afternoon. She found Ronan in his study, buried in papers and reports, his brow furrowed with concentration. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened immediately. "Ivy, what is it?" She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. Her eyes were shining with tears, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure joy. "I am pregnant," she whispered. "We are going to have a pup." Ronan stared at her. For a long moment he did not speak, did not move, did not seem to breathe. Then a sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a sob, and he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. A pup, he breathed against her hair. Our pup. Ivy, I never dared to hope. I know. She pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. Neither did I. But here we are. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, his hands resting on her still flat stomach as if he could already feel the new life growing inside her. That night, they stood on the balcony together, looking out over the kingdom that would one day belong to their child. The stars stretched endlessly above them, and the bond between them hummed with a contentment so deep it felt like coming home. I love you, Ronan said quietly. I will love you until the stars burn out and the world turns to dust. Ivy smiled and leaned into his warmth. And I will love you even longer than that. She had spent her whole life being told she was worthless, that she was property, that she deserved nothing more than whatever scraps others chose to give her. But standing here, in the arms of her mate, carrying their child beneath her heart, she knew the truth at last. She had always been worth fighting for. She had simply been waiting for someone brave enough to see it,